one of our vets that some of you have flown with was a prisoner of war, and part of his time was in the Hanoi Hilton. And we thought it would be interesting to interview Colonel Brunstrom today and let you kind of see what it was like to be shot down and be held on the other side and come home. Al Brunstrom was born in Menominee. Are we clapping already for the Colonel? Menominee, Michigan in 1931, which means he's old, okay? And attended schools in Michigan, North Dakota, and Central Missouri, which is my area of the country. Ever since the 7th grade, he wanted to be an Air Force fighter pilot. At the age of 17 and 2 weeks after his high school graduation, he enlisted in the Air Force in 1948. For those of you who don't know, the Air Force was actually formed on September 10th, 1947. So, see, he is one of those first people in. There was the Air Corps, Army Air Corps previously. He was trained as an aircraft an engine mechanic and was sent to Germany for the Berlin airlift, where he returned to the U.S. He worked as a mechanic in California. In 1952, as a staff sergeant, he reported to flight training as an aviation cadet. In 1953, he was commissioned and got his wings. He was a fighter pilot or an instrument flight instructor in Texas, Arizona, Korea, and Nevada. At Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, from 1956 to 1958, he flew support aircraft for the United States Air Force Thunderbirds. I would associate with those too. And met his bride-to-be, Helen, an Air Force nurse, military family. They were married and had a daughter, Kathy. His service continued with the Air Force Defense Command, and he was stationed in Washington, Northern Japan, Thailand, and New York. In the spring of 1964, he went to Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina, to fly the RF-101. He was sent TDY to the Philippines in 1965. 1966, he was sent to Vietnam and Thailand. In flying reconnaissance, he only was armed with a camera.
I have a 38.
Me too. He flew 14 1/2 combat missions. I guess you can figure that out for yourself.
114.
I'm sorry. He's quick to correct you, by the way. You'll find out as we go through. 114 1/2 combat commissions, 250 hours of combat time. April 22nd, 1966, he was shot down north of Hanoi, Vietnam, and ejected from the airplane. As soon as he landed in a rice paddy, he was captured. Alan was held as a prisoner of war until his release almost 7 years later. He was reunited. I apologize. With his wife and daughter, Kathy, on Valentine's Day, 1973. Upon his repatriation, Alan attended the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, and in the following year he completed a business degree from Troy State University. His next assignment was with the Air Defense Command, and he was stationed in Montana. He retired as a colonel in 1978 after 30 years of military service. Alan moved to Florida and became the first airport manager at the Boca Raton Airport. For 10 years, he facilitated major improvements at the airport, including the construction of hangars and a terminal building. After retiring again, he and his wife were able to travel extensively within the United States and abroad. He has lived in the Woods and Lakes Air Park in Florida for 28 years and has been was married for 58 years. He enjoyed flying his personal planes for 25 years, a V-tailed Beach Bonanza and Piper Comanche. He has one grandson who currently serves as a captain in the Army and is a Black Hawk medical evacuation pilot, so carries through, doesn't it? He has flown T-6s, T-28s, T-33s, F-84s, F-86s, C-119s, C-123s, which I liked in Vietnam, RF-101s, T-38s, and T-39s. He has 2 Silver Stars, 1 Legion of Merit, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 2 Bronzes, Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, 6 Air Medals, and a POW medal. That's a hell of a deal, folks. My resume doesn't look like that. Okay, I wrote down some specific questions or some things so that I could get Alan talking about his service. I just read your bio, and you've had a very interesting career in life. First of all, Colonel, thanks for your service. We really appreciate it. I'd like to hone in on that critical day that led to the almost 7 years of your life being held in captivity. That was April 22nd, 1966. Tell us about that day.
Bad day at Flat Rock.
Mike?
It was a bad day at Flat Rock. I took off just about noon. Well, first of all, I was briefed for a road recce along the east coast of North Vietnam, which would have been a milk run. I was out pre-flighting the airplane when they called me back in, said we had a change of mission. So they were going to strike a target that afternoon, and they needed immediate photography. I screwed up and didn't get the pictures home. Anyway, I took off from Udon Air Base, Thailand, went across Vientiane, Thailand, or Vientiane, Laos, and up across Dien Bien Phu, went up to the China border, went northwest to a point north of Hanoi, turned south, and my target was at the end of a mountain range. As we came down, I was flying wing that day. I was supposed to be checking out a new guy's flight lead, but when we got to the target, he says, I'm too close in, I can't make the turn on the target. So I said, well, you just swing wide and I can make the target. So I swung in and low level came across at 650 knots at about 150 feet. At the bridge in my viewfinder, we had a big, like a periscope right in the cockpit in the instrument panel. Had the bridge in sight through the viewfinder when I felt a thump on the right engine. So I hit the mic button to tell me my wingman had been hit. And just as I hit the mic button, I got a second hit in the right engine. And so the call came out, Bill, I've been hit twice. And of course, all the red lights in the cockpit immediately started lighting up like a Christmas tree. And of course, red lights in the cockpit are not a good thing. So I thought I went a long way after I got hit. But my wingman says that I bailed out, or I ejected within 15 seconds of when I was hit. Seemed like a long time. And as I was floating down, it was a Friday noon, and my first conscious thought, damn, I'm going to miss beer call tonight. I didn't miss beer call, I had beer that night. So anyway, I hit the ground. There was about 100 people running toward me from all directions. So I hit the ground, and anybody that's any aviators or paratroopers, you have a quick release on your harness, or on your to release the canopy. Pretty good wind blowing, pulling me backwards. And I was knee deep in muck in the rice paddy. So I released the quick releases, the canopy disappeared, and I reached for the chest strap to take off the harness. And that's when hands grabbed mine and took it away. So I said, how much did your escape and evasion school help you out? I said, well, in the 5 seconds before they had me, I didn't have a chance to check it out. So anyway, they took me to a small camp up on the China border at Lang Son, and kept me there for several hours. And finally put me in a vehicle, and we headed for Hanoi. It's only 60 miles, but we worked over the roads there, so we had a little difficulty navigating it. We left about 8 o'clock in the evening and didn't get to Hanoi until 6 in the morning. But while we were traveling along, it must have been about midnight or so, there was four people in the vehicle, kind of weapons carrier type vehicle for those in the military. And I was sitting in the back on the floor, my feet tied together, and my hands handcuffed behind my back. And we stopped somewhere along the road, and the 3 guys left, and left 1 guy to guard me. When I left, I could hear loud noises, music, laughter. So I think what they stopped at is an old-fashioned roadhouse. After a while, one of the guys that had gone in originally came back and brought me a beer. So I had a beer call that night. So anyway, they finally got me to Hanoi in about 6 in the morning and put me in Heartbreak Hotel, which some of you probably heard of. And the rest is history.
Can you tell us about everyday life? What you were there for? Well, you will learn as we go along that he was you know how people can't hold a job and they keep getting different jobs? Al couldn't stay in the same prison camp. He just kept moving from prison camp to prison camp. I don't know if you were unruly or they just kept moving you around. But we started out in Hanoi, and I think people will be very curious as to what's that like? What's the day in, day out?
Well, I went back in the year 2000 because I wanted to see what was outside the walls of Hanoi. Wallow, or the Hanoi. I spent a year there within the compound, and of course never saw the outside. So when I went back in 2000, I got to look at what was the other side of the wall.
Mm-hmm. How about how they treat you? What's your food like?
If they wanted something, they would twist on you until they got it. If they didn't want something, it was live and let live. Food was, we got fed twice a day, once about 10 to 11 o'clock in the morning, and another about 3 to 4 in the afternoon. And they had 2 staples. One was rice, and the other was French bread. The French were there for 100 years, and they learned to make bread from them. But I don't think the French would have claimed their bread. So, along with the rice or bread, we always had a vegetable. And it seemed to, we had 3 vegetables throughout the year, each one for about 4 months, every day, twice a day. We had cabbage soup for 4 months, then we had pumpkin soup for 4 months, then we had sewer green soup for 4 months. And sewer greens, if any of in the Southeast Asia, the thongs or canals all have vines grown on the water. And the vines are hollow stemmed, so they float on top of the water. And they'd go in with kind of like a rowboat and just cut the leaves off down to water level and come back the next day and they're back and they'd cut some more. So a very prolific plant. They had lots of them.
Okay. As I mentioned, he was in several prison camps. I can name some of them here. He was at Hanoi Hilton. They called it the Heartbreak Hotel. It's one of the places.
That was one section.
Yeah, one piece. And then he was in one called the Zoo, which he said was, I think, Little America was the nickname for it.
That's another nickname for it.
Then he was in Hanoi Hilton again, and he was at Little Las Vegas, Desert Inn, and Stardust.
Yeah.
Okay. Then he couldn't hold down a place, right? Then he was in Santé, and I believe he said they call that Camp Hope.
Yes.
And then he was in Camp Faith. Then he was back in Hanoi at Camp Unity number 3.
Camp Unity was a big compound and had buildings all the way around it. There were 7 buildings. And I spent a couple of years in Building Street.
And then he was in Dog Patch, not in Arkansas, by the way. And then he was at the Hanoi Hilton again in Camp Unity number 7. One of these, I think, is of particular interest, which is Santé, where I think you may or may not have been involved in a rescue mission. Can you talk about that?
Unfortunately, I missed the rescue.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
I was at Sante for 2 years and 2 months, and we moved out in July to a nearby camp about 10 miles away. It was a new camp, and I think their intent was to give us better facilities, because the one I was in had the worst facilities you could imagine. And the new camp, Camp Faith, had pretty good facilities. I was there for just a few months when the Sante raid happened in November of '70. And since Sante was only about 10 miles away, they woke us up at about midnight, and we watched all the fireworks, flares being dropped from C-130s, and SAMs going off all over the place. I saw SAM missiles being launched almost horizontally. They're trying to get the attackers, not successfully. Anyway, they had a very successful raid, except for one thing. They opened all the doors and didn't find anybody. But we watched it from 10 miles away, and we got word through the grapevine about a week later about what had happened. So we gave the Vietnamese a hard time about that. Since you told us they'd forgotten us, they tried to get us.
Did, now, at Sante, or maybe immediately after, you kind of got into different type of housing where you had more interaction with other prisoners?
When we went to Camp Faith, they had 5 large cells in one long building. And after we'd been there a while, they started letting us out in the compound. And first they'd let one room out at a time. We'd wander around and go to the other cells and talk to them through the doors. Then finally, they just opened the doors and let everybody out during the daytime.
Tell me about when you heard you were coming home.
Well, we heard all about the B-52 raids. They told us how they were bombing hospitals, women and children. Of course, we know that wasn't true, but they kept telling us about all these horrific bombing raids that, like I say, hit in the hospitals, women and children, and old folks. And when the bombing stopped, well, they stopped it for Christmas, and that left us a little upset. And then in January, well, I don't remember the exact date, I think it was New Year's Day, they resumed the bombing. And shortly after that, we heard a bunch of trucks come into the compound. And we went the next day, we had our gear all rolled up, ready to get on the trucks and move out of there. But they didn't come that day. So we sat there all day with everything packed up, ready to go. And when I say packed up, all our belongings, we had the rice mats. You've seen the beach mats are the same type mat that most of you have probably seen somewhere along the line. We put all our gear in that, roll it up, and we were ready to travel. They didn't come, so the next day they came, took us back to Hanoi. I was up at a place called Dog Patch up on the China border at the time. Came back to Hanoi, and a couple days later they fitted us with our going home clothes. And then they had the 27th of January, they had signed a peace agreement. And the peace agreement specified that they would read us the agreement and provide each one of us a copy of it. So we got that, and it said that all POWs would be released within 60 days. That was on the 27th of January, and I was in the first group that went out on the 12th of February. So 2 significant days. I got my freedom on Lincoln's birthday, and got to Travis and met with my wife Helen and my daughter Kathy over here on Valentine's Day. So it was a pretty big day for us.
Tell me about that day.
Well, we came in by C-141, and everything we did was by order of shoot down. There was 3 guys that are getting off at Travis. They had about 40 POWs on there, but the rest of them were going back to Scott Air Force Base and Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, other different places. So there's only 3 of us got off from California. The other 2 were B-52 crew, who had only been over there about 6 weeks from the Christmas bombing. So they had when I got off the airplane, they had 3 cars lined up, and somehow they got them out of order. My wife was in the 3rd car instead of the 1st one. And when I came off the airplane, my wife told the driver to pull up. And because that was me coming down the red carpet. Driver ignored her. So, pardon my French, she says, "God damn it, that's my husband to come down, pull up there." And he still didn't, he said, "Ma'am, they told me I couldn't move till these other cars moved." Well, the other 2 guys were picking up B-52 guys that were going to come out after me. So Kathy and Helen jumped out of the car and came running over, and we met at the end of the red carpet. And many of you have probably seen that picture of the 3 of us all wrapped up there on the carpet. But just before they came over, as I came down the reception line, there was a bunch of generals there. I was saluting and shaking hands, and got to the last guy in line, and somebody you all have probably heard of, Chappie James. He was a 2-star general at the time, and later he became a 4-star general and was commander of NORAD. He was 1st Air Force Black 4-star general, tremendous guy. And during the Vietnam War, he worked in the Pentagon in the POW function, so he was involved with the POWs for a long time. One of the nicest guys I ever met. But 6'5" and very imposing figure. So anyway, when I came down the line, he was the last one in line, and I saluted him, shook hands, tried to move on, and he wouldn't let go. And he's looking around. Pardon my French again. He says, "God damn it, something's all fucked up." What happened was Kathy and Helen were in a staff car, 3rd in line, and since the car wouldn't move up, they got out and ran over, and we met at the end of the red carpet. There they took me to the hospital in Travis, and a good time was had by all.
Now, if I have it right, when you ended up not coming back, Kathy was 6 years, 9 months, somewhere in there.
I was shot down on the 22nd of April. Her 6th birthday would have been the 25th of April.
Okay. She was about 6. So I actually asked her what that was like for her, which we're not going to have time to talk about, but I think that's a very interesting story to not know that your father's alive for a long period of time.
Speaking of that, she never told me about it.
Okay, as you can tell, I went through this really, really fast because if we want more information, I think Al will be happy to talk to us. Has anybody got any, I hope you don't mind, we got any questions out here, specific questions for Al? That's amazing. I don't, what am I looking? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You ever come in contact with John McCain?
I knew that question. I asked that same question.
No.
Repeat the question.
Go ahead.
We have 2 categories of guys, FNGs and FOGs.
Yeah, you got
New guys and old guys.
Yeah, right.
He was an FNG.
He came later on. So when well, you tell it better than I do. When you didn't have any interaction with John because you really weren't there together.
No, they had several different camps and we were split up quite a bit. So I was never in the same camp with him until we came back, and we were in different cell blocks. So I still didn't see him. I never met him until after we got back home a couple of years later.
Okay. It's interesting. I asked the same question and I forgot to ask again. Yes, Gary.
Colonel, were the officers and the enlisted men all kept together in these camps, or did they separate you?
We were sort of separated. There was only 3 enlisted men up there because it's mostly fighter pilots, Air Force and Navy, or navigators. Some people had excess baggage in the back seat. Hope I don't offend any navigators here. But
Most of
His
your
questions
officers.
were officers and enlisted. So.
Oh, we had 3 enlisted men. One was a crew chief on a C-47 that got shot down somehow, got across to DMZ. And one was a helicopter mechanic, and one was a helicopter medic. So they were basically kept separate from us. We'd see them, for some reason they had pretty much had to run the compound. They did a lot of work in the yard, cleaning up the debris around the yard and so on. So sometimes they'd sneak away when the guard wasn't looking and come up to the cell door and talk to us a little bit. But we didn't have a lot of contact with them.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Were they good about giving you medical attention in those camps?
The question is, did he get medical attention as he needed it?
They had a doctor that saw us occasionally, and I found out he graduated from med school in 3 months. Very, very expert doctor. And the biggest thing he did for us, well, the guy that get diarrhea or one thing or another, and they had some medications for that. But the only time I ever saw him, I didn't really ever saw the doctor, but I had, my plate came out. I have an upper plate, and it got broken right after I got shot down. And so I was
Going to give you a demonstration.
I had a toothless grin. When I was at Sante, I've been in a 1-man room for a while and a 2-man room, and they finally moved me to a 6-man room. And when I walked into that 6-man room, the other guys said that was the biggest toothless grin they'd ever saw when I walked in and had a group of people to talk to.
I'm going to borrow your microphone. Any other questions?
Over here. Were you
Okay,
ever,
wait a minute. Wait, here's one. Go ahead.
were you ever tortured?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
When we first got there, I was at Heartbreak Hotel, and I was interrogated 3 times a day. After breakfast, come back after lunch, or between, have breakfast, come back after lunch, go back to the cell, and then have an afternoon meal, and back out at night. That went on for a few days. And I was sticking a name, rank, and seal number, and they were really pushing it. So I got off fairly well there in that 2 weeks. But then I went out to a camp we called the Zoo, also had nicknamed Little America. It was out on the southwest corner of, on the outskirts of Hanoi. And there they got serious. They wanted something, they twisted till they got it. And their favorite method is put a rope around one arm, put it behind your back, get the rope to the other arm, and then pull it to where your elbows are locked together. You might want to try that to see. If you think it can't happen, give me a short length of rope and I'll show you how easy it is. But it can be done.
There's one question back there.
Yes, how long before your family was contacted or notified that you were a POW?
I was shot down in April, and we had a, I guess I shouldn't be talking about it, but we had a secret code that they used in letters. And I didn't write a letter for 4 years, but one of the guys, you probably heard of, Jim Stockdale, I was shot down in April of '66, and he sent my name out in January '67 in a letter, and my wife was notified in April of '67 that I was a POW. But she said she didn't believe it. So, till four years later, Helen was living in Miami with her mother at the time and with her daughter Kathy. And had her brother and his wife lived down there. And Helen got a call from her brother Albert's wife. She was at a museum in downtown Miami and says, "Helen, come down here immediately, there's something you ought to see." and it was a picture painted by Maxine McCaffrey. It showed a POW sitting on a bench, on a concrete bench, and the wall behind them, actually the concrete was a bunk. We had very soft bunks. They give you a rice mat for a good, made you good soft mattress for it. And the picture is a guy sitting on a bunk with a bunch of names on the wall. And mine just happened to be right over the head of the POW sitting there. That picture, it's almost faded out, it's hard to see it anymore, but when I got back, I talked to Maxine McCaffrey a number of times, and I asked her how she happened to get my name for that, where that came from. And she said she went to the Pentagon and told them what she had in mind and would like to get some names of POWs, and she was going to put them on the wall in her painting because she thought Americans would do that. But we didn't, because they wouldn't let you, any marks, they'd come in and whitewash over us. So that was a futile effort. But anyway, she made that painting, and I say there was, my sister-in-law was in a museum and saw that and called Helen, and she looked at that and said, I knew then you were alive because I recognized your handwriting. I said, sorry about that, but that's not my handwriting, that's a painting. But it gave her hope.
Because we're running short on time, I want people having to hang. If you want to start serving dessert, and we'll kind of wrap this up. I hope people enjoyed this. I want to thank you for your time, your service.